Sorry, Kinley. Yes, that was you. I apologize. All right. Here I am again. I know. It's me, not Ken. I wrote, last time that I was up here, I said, don't get used to this. And here I am again. And I really want to reiterate that. It was only like 10 weeks ago that I was up here. It was so recent ago that one of the opening sentences in my last one was, Ken's been going through Exodus, which I could still say that today because just last week he was still going through Exodus. So that's how recent, or that's how long he's been going through Exodus. I don't know, one or the other. But now they're asking me again. So here I am. But Ken has been gone. He's been at Twin Rocks on the Oregon coast all week. He's been having an intentional time away of rest. He was supposed to go to Sabbath by the Sea, and it ended up being canceled, and he said, I'm still just going to go. Or I think Teresa said, you still need to go, one way or the other. So he's been there. He's been on the Oregon coast, and I knew that he wanted to get away. You know, we've been talking a little bit in the office, and I know he's been looking for that, and so me covering for him helped for that to happen. So I said yes. I also said yes because a lot of the other times that he's going to be gone this year, like man camp or yearly meeting or other things like that, I will be gone with him at those things. So I know I will not be asked again for a long time. So I was like, all right, I'll say yes because I literally cannot be chosen for the next probably 7 or 8 months. So I agreed to do it. So our question today, we talked about life hack, and I saw some people giving some weird looks. I saw some people in the comments online giving some stuff. So who has heard of the term life hack before? Anyone? Some people? Yeah, we're getting some hands up. That's one of our questions of the day today. What is a life hack that you have used and that you liked? So hopefully everyone knows what a life hack is, but if not, I'll tell you right now and give you some examples. So here's the definition. I was surprised to learn that life hack actually is in the dictionary. It's there's a lot of stuff in the dictionary nowadays, but they added the term life hack to the dictionary in 2004, so it's been around for quite some time. I was a freshman in high school in 2004, so that's a long time. But yeah, some people are like, oh man. The definition says it's an informal term. It's a usually simple and clever tip or technique for accomplishing some familiar task more easily and efficiently. So I find a lot of life hacks to be kind of silly and not really practical. The thought of doing them just seemed really weird. If someone actually saw you doing these things, they would just laugh at you. So I'm going to show you some pictures of some that were found online. When you just search life hack, these are some quote-unquote examples that come up. I don't know if people actually do these or not, and if anyone here does any of these that I'm going to show up, I do not mean any offense to you. Maybe they actually work. We'll see. But I actually do 2 of them. We're going to look at a few. I do 2 of them, so we're all in good company here. But here are some of the ones that I found. First one, if you can't tell, it says, need an inexpensive cookbook holder, try a pants hanger. So, I mean, that works, I guess. I can see it practically working, but I would feel kind of weird and silly if someone walked into the kitchen and saw this happening. But apparently it works, so there's one. Here's another one. And it's kind of hard to read, but it says, heavy sleeper, tired of snoozing past your alarm, use the smartphone in a cup trick to crank up the volume. So there's a lot of hacks involving this, and it does work if you put a cup or some kind of, or not a cup, if you put a phone in a cup, it'll amplify the volume coming out. So yes, in theory it works, but I said, one, you can tell that this is a really old idea because that's the first iPhone ever. But it does make it louder. But when you look at this, if you're doing this at night, how are you supposed to charge your phone? I don't know. I charge my phone when I sleep, so you can't have your phone plugged in that contraption. You could turn it upside down, but then the speaker's on the top, so I don't know if it would amplify. So I don't know. This one, it works practically, but I'm not sure how it would actually work in real life. Here's another one. A frozen saturated sponge in a bag makes an ice pack that won't drip all over when it melts. So, I mean, in theory that works, but I don't know why you just wouldn't use like an actual ice pack, you know, like one of those blue gel ones, because that also won't really drip when it melts, so I don't know. Once again, you get into some of these that it's like, yes, it would work, but does it really make my life easier to go and soak a sponge and put it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it when you could just probably have an ice pack or just ice cubes in your freezer? Here's one that I talked about at the beginning. Put a wooden spoon across a boiling pot of water to keep it from boiling over. This one does work. I don't know why. I don't look up the scientific reason of why, but it does work. So if you're ever boiling pasta or something and it keeps boiling over the edge, if you put a wooden spoon, whenever like the bubbles hit the wood, it just like stops. So there you go. I just did that on Thursday when I made spaghetti, so it works. And one more here. This one's really hard to read. I'm not even going to be able to read it from all the way back here. But basically, and I do this one too, you freeze coffee in ice cube tray to use in your iced coffee. So that way, when the ice melts, it's not watering down your coffee, it's just putting more coffee into your coffee. Makes sense? So I do that. Once again, this requires probably more extra work on the front end, so I'm not sure that it's actually making your life quote-unquote easier. Becky says it's worth it. I do it. I say it's worth it. The only downside, quote-unquote downside, is it really like gunks up and stains your ice cube tray. At least mine does. Like I have a dedicated ice cube tray for the coffee ones because it just stains that thing, and even when you crack them out, it like leaves like a little coffee residue in there. So you don't want to use that then to make ice cubes with. And if you have a nice fancy fridge, you don't need that to make ice with. But so those are some life hacks. Maybe you do some of those. Maybe you have other ones that you can write in the comments to let people know and help change their life. You never know. So back to that. Our question today is, what is a life hack you've used and liked? So you can comment that and let people know. There are a lot of different life hacks. Like those were just 5 or 6 from like a page of like 100. And I really didn't think a lot of them were useful, but whatever. But I think people are fascinated by them, and they're always looking for shortcuts or ways that we can improve like efficiency or make our lives quicker or better or whatever. Sometimes it works, like the pasta one. I really think it requires no extra time. You just reach over, grab a wooden spoon, put it on. You're already there in the kitchen. And it saves you time. If your water doesn't boil over, then you don't have to clean up extra at the end. So that one's pretty practical. Some of the other ones I don't think save you time, or I don't even know, like the clothes hanger, you'd have to leave your kitchen to go to your closet to find pants hanger. I don't know how that really saves you time. But, some of them, the idea is to make your life easier and save time. So today we're going to be looking at a story in 1 Samuel chapter 4, where the Israelites try using a quote-unquote life hack of sorts to get God to do something for them, and we'll see that it doesn't really work out. Some things there really is just no shortcut to. You have to put in the work, and as much as we sometimes may view God as a genie or like a waiter that grants wishes and does things for us if we say the right thing or do the right prayer or the right ritual, that's just not the case. And so with God, there really is no shortcuts or quote-unquote life hack. So we're going to read this. You guys can turn. It's on page 228 in the Sanctuary Bibles, 1 Samuel chapter 4. We're going to start at the beginning. But would you stand with me as we read this? And I've got it on the screen here too. It says, "And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, 'Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant to the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies.' So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. As soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "A god has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled every man to his home. And there was a great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. All right, you can be seated. So, not a very uplifting passage. The Israelites went to battle against the Philistines, and they lost. 4,000 people get killed right at the beginning. They lose the battle. But then they have this idea to bring the Ark of the Covenant with them into battle, and that will mean that God is with them, and they will surely win. So they do that, and they lose again. They lose even worse the second time than they did the first time. It says the second time that 30,000 people died, and the Philistines end up stealing the Ark of the Covenant to add insult to injury. So before we get into some of this, I think it would be helpful to do a refresher on the Ark of the Covenant. Because if you're like me, the first thing you think of when you hear the word Ark of the Covenant is dun 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 dun, dun Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you haven't seen this, I said I was a freshman in high school in 2004. This movie is 40 years old. That might really make you feel old, but it deals with, so I don't feel bad spoiling the plot because it's 40 years old. Hopefully you've seen it by now. But it deals with Indiana Jones. He's an archaeologist. He's trying to find the Ark of the Covenant before Hitler and the Nazis do. Very practical. In the movie, some government agents come to Indiana Jones because they've encrypted like a secret message from the Nazis, and they're trying to find this location, and they think they've gotten close. And so they want to get Indiana to come and help them beat the Nazis to it and get the Ark of the Covenant. And one of the professors says that Hitler wants the Ark specifically, quote, because an army which carries the Ark before it is invincible, which we just know from reading this story that that's not true. So I would say to the Nazi army, they have not read 1 Samuel chapter 4, or as the Indiana Jones would put it, any of you guys ever go to Sunday school? He says that to the guys. He's like, have you guys ever gone to Sunday school before? So there's your plug for Sunday school. You could learn some stuff there. So it's a good movie. It's entertaining. Leah and I watched it on Friday night again. I was in the zone to watch it after thinking about it all week. But they do find the Ark. They actually find it really easily, which makes you think like, oh man, it should be so easy to find. But no, even today, no one has found it. They do find it at the end. The Nazis open it. Some crazy stuff happens. You can go watch it for yourself. I thought about showing a clip, but I was like, it might be a little too crazy. So, we'll just leave that out. Plus, we don't want to be basing our knowledge of the Ark of the Covenant off this movie. So we're going to move on here to our refresher on the Ark of the Covenant. In Exodus chapter 25, you can turn there if you want. I'm just going to read this. This is where Moses gets the instruction to make the ark. It says, starting in verse 10, have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles out of acacia wood, overlay them with gold. Insert the poles so you can carry it. You're not supposed to touch it. Then put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law, which I will give you. And later in Hebrews chapter 9, we learned that this ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. And God said, I will meet with you between these cherubim. I will give you a message there. And so this is kind of the beginning of the Ark of the Covenant when they make it. And then there are a few examples in the Old Testament, or not examples, I guess stories in the Old Testament where the Ark of the Covenant is used and is present during some pretty significant events that maybe would lead the people in 1 Samuel 4 to be like, hey, if we just go get the Ark, it's done these things in the past. So in Joshua chapter 3, the Israelites needed to cross the Jordan River to get across to the Promised Land, and orders were given to the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant. In verse 5, it says, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. The next day the Lord proclaimed, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of Israel so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. And they bring the Ark of the Covenant to this river. The guys carrying it go and stand in the middle of the river, and the water just stops so that everyone can cross safely. And then when they get out, the water keeps going again. So the Ark, representing God's presence here, allowed the people to safely cross the Jordan. And then later in Joshua chapter 6, we get another story with the Ark. As the Israelites continued on their journey, the Ark became instrumental again. People were up against Jericho's wall where no one came in and no one came out. The Lord told Joshua to have the men march around the wall for 6 days. Priests in the procession blew trumpets, followed by the Ark of the Covenant. And on the 7th day, the marching army was instructed to give a loud shout, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. You probably all know the little Sunday school song. The people did what the Lord instructed and took over the city. The chapter ends with verse 27, which says, so the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. God's presence and power, seen in the Ark marching army, caused the walls of Jericho to collapse. So there's some backstory with the Ark, and all that to say, given these stories and knowing what happened, I guess I don't fully blame the Israelites for thinking like, hey, let's just go get the Ark, The Ark was present at these other things, and everything worked out, so we just lost. Let's go get the Ark. Maybe we'll win something. So in the start of 1 Samuel 4, when they lose the battle to the Philistines, then in verse 3, they begin questioning why God has allowed them to lose. We see in the first battle that Israel loses over 4,000 men. Earlier in the Bible, God had promised them that he'd be with them and that he would strengthen them to the point that, quote, one man could chase 1,000. So, they thought they were going to be so strong, God would be with them, and then they lose, so they're kind of thinking like, what is going on? Why did we just lose? I think they even say, why did God allow us to lose? Or depending on your translation, like, why did God cause us to lose? So they're kind of questioning what's going on here. A lot of commentaries, when I was preparing for this and reading, they would just say there was, quote, sin in the camp. And I was like, I just wish they would like say what. It's like, okay, now you got to look some more and like, what are we talking about here? So looking some more, if you just go back a few chapters, basically the two leaders that we see here in this story, Hophni and Phinehas, they were Eli's sons. They're the main problem here. It says, Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were dishonoring God and taking advantage of their positions as priests, and Eli allowed their behavior to go unchecked. So that's like in chapter 2, there's a few things about that. Back in chapter 2, Eli rebukes his sons. It says he kept hearing about all these bad things that they were doing and that they would not listen to him, but he never removed them from their positions. And later there's a subtitled section that says, the Lord rejects Eli's household. So, because of this, because Eli was not keeping things in order and keeping his sons in order, and they're the ones kind of leading this charge, and they're the ones that actually bring the ark out. They're the ones who carry it. So they're kind of misusing things and not leading these people correctly. So the Israelites who have been going on and who have had God's favor with them now have some bad leadership, and it's going to be addressed here in chapter 4. So after the first loss, instead of looking for the sin problem that the elders come to a different conclusion. It says they decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant out to the battle in order to turn the battle. They do ask the right questions in verse 3. Why has the Lord defeated us? but they just come to the wrong conclusions. In a way, they're trying to do a quote-unquote life hack with God here. They think in all these previous examples where things went the right way and the Israelites won, the ark was there. So we're just missing the ark. Let's just go get the ark, and then we can have God do his thing, and we can get God to do what matters, which obviously we know didn't work out. It says, and to make matters even worse, Hophni and Phinehas are the ones who carry out the ark, and they're the ones who parade it out. So in verse 5, hopefully you can read that, but I'll read it. It says, as soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. So when the ark arrives, everyone gets excited. They're cheering. It says the cheering and celebrating was so loud that the earth resounded. And remember, knowing the history and remembering that God said he would reside between the cherubim, and that maybe they thought that God was too far away before, so now that they've got the ark here, they're like, yes, he's here, he's with us, he's in the battlefield with us. So, they get excited by this. They think, now we're going to win. A Bible commentary that I was reading says about this verse, it is common for those that have estranged themselves from the vitals of religion to discover a great fondness for the rituals and external observances of it. And I was like, that is pretty harsh. That seems pretty, it's true, but it's just like when you read that, you're like, ooh, have I done that sometimes? So it says, those that have estranged themselves from the vitals of religion discover a great fondness for rituals and external observances. Basically saying they want the appearance of being religious without doing the things that actually matter. So in a way, they have turned the ark into an idol of something that can give them quick access to God. But soon, they're going to learn how wrong they are. But for now, they're very excited. They're like, woohoo, we got the ark. They're cheering and they're partying. They think they're going to win the next battle. They think it's like a cheat code or something, or a life hack. But it was all just a charade, hence the title, Charaders and the Lost Ark, So we see in verse 6 and 7 that the Philistine army, they heard these cheers and they became scared. It says, and when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, a god has come into the camp. So they don't really know any better. They have heard stories, and the God of Israel was known and struck fear in the minds of those who even worshipped other gods. They're familiar, but they're not fully, educated on the topic. And they have the same kind of thinking, I guess, that maybe the Israelites were doing, is like they knew about God of Israel, but now that the ark is here, now they maybe are thinking, oh, now God is here. Because they even say, a God has now come into the camp, as if God wasn't there before. So then in verse 8, it says, woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Now, once again, they're kind of showing their ignorance or lack of, history understanding here, because the plagues in Egypt were inflicted before the ark was even created. So they're kind of conflating the two things here. It's like, well, we know the God of Israel did that, and we also know the ark did this. They're just kind of making them be one and the same, and not really getting the timeline together. They think the God of Israel did the plagues, and the ark was there when the walls fell, and we know they're kind of one and the same. So, oh no, the ark is here. We are in deep trouble now. So the ark is just a visible token of God's presence. It's not God's presence in and of itself, but that's kind of the way they're viewing this here. It's like, oh no, the ark is here. God is here now. We're in real trouble. So regardless of all this, even though they are a little wrong and don't quite have their timelines correct with the plagues and all that kind of stuff, they still decide to fight, which is interesting to me. Because they have enough information where if I was in their shoes, I would be like, no, we're not doing this now. I don't want to go to battle with them. Because they know about the plagues, and they know about these other stories probably, and they still think, well, let's do it. Let's go to battle, which I would just be like, no. But they kind of rally the troops. He gives them that speech like, be men, Philistines, let's take this day. He probably gives them like a Braveheart speech or something. I don't know. And they decide to go to battle. So it says there in verse 10, They still go to battle, and they still win. They actually win better than they did before. Verse 10, so the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. So even though on paper, the Israelites think they've got all the signs of winning, because they got the ark now, and they got God with them, and all this kind of stuff, and they're excited and having a party, they still lose. And they lose even worse than before. And after bringing in the ark, they had greater confidence. They thought they were the people of God, and they were ready to go. They got hyped up, but they still got destroyed. So, I changed at the right time. What we learn here is that, kind of going back with before, external privileges will not secure anyone who abuse them and do not live up to them. So they have the ark, they think, we've got this now, but they've kind of been not living up to what they're supposed to be doing, and these two guys specifically, Hophni and Phinehas, have not been living up to their position and kind of abusing their position. So just because they have the ark doesn't mean God's going to automatically grant them and do things for them. Once again, they were trying to hack the system and take a shortcut to getting God to do something for them. And I wrote, and if we're honest, I think a lot of us sometimes maybe find ourselves in this position. I know that I have. We think if I read my devotional every single day, then that means God has to answer my next prayer. Or we try to keep a balance of what we do. It's like, oh, I got angry at someone and thought some not great things about them on the way to work, so let me change my radio station to KTSY to balance that out, I don't know, and keep the scales even or something. I mentioned at the beginning, we've all heard God is not like a genie that just is there to answer our wishes and prayers, or in a similar way, God is not like a waiter. I prefer the thought of God is not like a waiter, just because I think that is more, the way that I would slip into thinking of God. It says, I wrote, when you go to a restaurant, if your waiter is good, you really don't think about them much during your meal until you need something. It's like, oh, I need a refill. Where's my waiter? And if they're really doing their good job, then you really don't think about them at all, because they'll be refilling your cup before you're even halfway done. We just want the waiter to bring us stuff and keep our food good, and we don't want to be waiting too long or for the check or something. When things really start to go wrong, that's when you notice. You're like, man, where is the waiter? We've been sitting here for 20 minutes. Where's the check? But if they're doing a good job, you don't really think about them. But sometimes, have you ever had a waiter who comes and sits at the table with you? It's pretty rare, but sometimes you'll be sitting there and maybe it's busy in the restaurant and they'll just pop down. They'll be like, sorry, I just need to get out of the way. That's really awkward. For me it is, at least, when the waiter sits at the table, because it's I don't want you sitting here with me. You're not part of our our meal here. And so I think going more with that analogy is that's kind of what, if we're thinking of God as the waiter who just does stuff for us and brings stuff to him, if he sits at the table, then we're kind of whoa, you're just supposed to come when I call you. I don't want you here all the time. I don't want you sitting at the table. So it said, I wrote, God wants to be at the table with us, or better yet, actually have us at the table with him. He's probably the one who's really at the table. But we sometimes would rather just have him be the waiter that does things for us when it's convenient for us. So at the end of the story, to add insult to injury, as I said, the Philistines steal the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark that shouldn't have even been there in the first place, because in some of these other stories, God instructed them to bring the Ark to these places and asked them to do it. In this one, they just kind of think, hey, let's just go get the Ark. And so they shouldn't have even brought it there in the first place. And then it gets stolen from them after they get defeated. So it says in verse 11, and the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So it said, the commentary that I read said, the slaughter of the priests, considering their bad character, was no great loss to Israel, but it was a dreadful judgment upon the house of Eli, which once again, kind of harsh to say that their death was no loss. People didn't even care. But really, they were bad leaders, and they're the ones who have kind of got them into this position. And so the taking of the ark was a judgment against Israel, and it also showed God's displeasure against them. They misused and put their faith in the ark instead of God, and then they have that item stolen from them, almost as if God is saying, like, if you aren't going to use this thing the right way, then I'm just going to take it away from you, you know? Like, if you've ever done that with your children or something, you know, if they're just like, you give them a toy and they're like misusing it, and you're like, you're going to break it doing that, so I'm just going to take that away from you. It's like they had this thing and they're just kind of misusing it, so it gets stolen. It's a real low and humbling moment for the Israelites. So I originally set out to do all of chapter 4 today. That's why the beginning said 1 Samuel 4, and I think even the bulletin said 1 Samuel 4. But like, we're only halfway through the chapter, and you know, we're running low on time. So I stopped it here, but the story continues a little bit, and you can read that. Maybe next time I preach in October, I'll pick up the next half. I don't know. But we're going to stop here. We're going to go halfway through. But I think this is a good stopping point to reflect. So our other question of the day was, what are some common examples today of people treasuring a symbol of God's glory over God himself? We don't have the Ark of the Covenant, but I think we probably all still have things that are symbols or things that God gives us that point to him that we may sometimes place over him himself. And so it's not on the bulletin, and they might not even have a slide for it in the back. I'm just learning today that I'm not sure if they're always prepared to do open worship. But I've been thinking all week, we're going to do open worship on this. But I don't know if they have a slide for open worship, so we'll see. Ken wasn't here. But we're going to go into open worship, and I want us to think about that question. What are some common examples today of people treasuring a symbol of God's glory over God himself? I'm in like a Facebook group with other youth pastors, and I don't know, there's probably just all kinds of pastors in there, but it's mainly for youth ministry. So I asked this question in there in preparation for this to kind of see what some people said. So here are some of the answers that I got back online from some of the people on there. One person said wearing a cross on jewelry or clothing. One person said any kind of formulaic prayer that you might say every single day. Another person said a fish bumper sticker on your car in hopes to not get a ticket. That one seems very specific, but another good one was someone saying having the Bible app on your phone but not using it. Another one that I thought of was like having a Bible verse on your wall in your house, and we have that in our house. So I just want to say none of these things in and of themselves are bad. That's not what I'm trying to get at. Like I just said, we have a giant wooden plaque with a verse from Matthew in our kitchen. And I even wanted to be cautious during this time. You know, like there's probably people in here wearing a cross necklace right now. I don't want to like single anybody out or say, yeah, Becky's like right here. I just mentioned we have a verse. I just think we need to caution ourselves to not get into the mindset of thinking because we have these outward appearances of being Christians that we're good to go and God will answer our every prayer and our lives will be easy. We cannot manipulate that by shopping at Christian businesses or listening only to KTSY in the car. Having those things are not a life hack into God's good graces. They're not bad. Once again, I'm not saying any of these things are wrong, but a real relationship with God requires more than just turning on the right radio station and putting a decorative verse on your wall. So as we go into a time of open worship, let's think about this question and what God might be having you realize from this story. If there's something that you feel you're being led to share with the whole church, then you can come up to the front and use the microphone. But let's go into a time of open worship.